Hello, welcome to AP Sources Simplified. Today we are looking at Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, which were his plans for world peace in the aftermath of World War I. First, let's take a quick look at the context. World War I was a major global conflict involving virtually every world power and their colonies. The war was between the Central Powers comprised of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, and the Allied powers comprised of France, Great Britain, Russia, the United States, and many others. The war began on July 28, 1914, following the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and ended on November 11, 1918. World War I was an incredibly bloody war, as a combination of new weaponry such as mustard gas, the machine gun, and the tank, with outdated military tactics, led to millions upon millions of casualties. The United States was officially neutral for most of the war, and Woodrow Wilson made it a part of his successful 1916 campaign for a second term, declaring as a campaign slogan, quote, "He kept us out of war." However, after winning a second term, and because of several acts of German aggression against the U.S., Wilson ended up asking Congress for a declaration of war, of which Congress obliged, and the United States officially entered the war in 1917. The United States was able to help the Allies defeat the Central Powers in 1918. Europe and the surrounding areas had been devastated by the war, which put the United States in a unique position in its history, as it could now shape the post-war world. World leaders convened in Versailles to craft a treaty to formally end the war and to ensure that a future war would never happen on such a global scale. There were several ideas which were proposed as framework for the treaty, one of which was Wilson's 14 points. Wilson's 14 points had to compete against all of the promises the British and French made to various allies around the world. While Wilson's 14 points were not completely followed, they were very influential, and some ideas would come to fruition. In Wilson's 14 points, there are 5 main arguments being made: self-determination for both ethnic groups and colonies, transparency of future treaties between countries, the removal of economic barriers to promote global economic prosperity, a reduction of national armaments, and the creation of an association of nations to help promote global political stability. The last major item, about an association of nations, will be controversial back in the United States. It would take the form of an international government that could solve disputes before they get out of hand, and if need be, nations could more easily act collectively on a rogue nation that was violating international law. This international organization will become known as the League of Nations. Next are the author's intentions. Woodrow Wilson is looking at this from the viewpoint of a world leader who would like to impart American ideals on the peace agreement and set up a framework for world peace, which is also his purpose. He is intending this principally for other world leaders, but Wilson will also go on a public relations blitz with his ideas and attempt to convince the general world public, skeptical conservatives, and jingos back in the United States that his 14 points are the best way forward after the Great War. Now on to who would agree and disagree with the source. On the global stage, many people in the colonies of global empires agree with Wilson and would love to have self-determination. I'm sure some Filipinos were wondering if America would live up to its words. Others in the Wilsonian democracy camp back in the United States would agree with what Wilson is attempting to achieve. But for AP US history purposes, we want to close in on those who would disagree with Wilson. And one person in particular was Henry Cabot Lodge. Lodge was an influential senator who had influence over whether Wilson's treaty would be ratified. In the US, a president can craft and sign a treaty, but the legislative branch has oversight powers in the form of ratifying the treaty, which needs to be done in order for it to be law for US foreign policy. Lodge was a longtime jingo, an advocate of projecting US power abroad. While it may seem like he would be in favor of a US-created and backed peace agreement, however, he actually had some serious reservations about it, especially the League of Nations, as Lodge felt that it would undermine US sovereignty and may force the US to act in cases that were not in its interests. Lodge insisted upon some special reservations before he would sign on to the League of Nations. It is doubtful other countries would have abided by this arrangement, so Wilson refused Lodge's demands. And while the world signed on to Wilson's ideas, the US would fall short of ratifying them and would not join the League of Nations. Finally, let's look at the legacy of Wilson's 14 points. The League of Nations would be without the United States. and it's difficult to say what the overall impact would have been if the US had joined. But the League of Nations would be unable to stop the rise of aggressive fascist states of Germany, Italy, and Japan, and stop World War II. The US would still be a global leader in disarmament agreements in the 1920s. However, they were not abided by and could not thwart the rearmament of major global powers throughout the 1930s. Wilson's ideas will live on, though. After World War II, the United States will again be in a position of framing a post-war world. And this time it would follow through on its ideas and create the United Nations, situated in the United States, with the US being one of the 5 permanent members on its Security Council. Okay, that does it for Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. If you liked the video, click that like button and share with your friends and students.